2,000 tons of molten iron, enough to melt stone, bend steel beams, and erase a man from existence in an instant. Imagine a structure taller than 10 stories, its brick and iron frame looming over a frozen Pennsylvania valley, dwarfing the logging camps and riverbanks that surround it. Smoke choked the sky, turning the morning light into a hazy orange that reflected off rivers and icy ground alike. Sparks shot upward like fiery meteors, landing among men who shuffled nervously along the furnace yard, their faces blackened with soot, their eyes wide with both awe and fear. This was no ordinary workplace. This was a living, breathing machine, a mechanical titan that demanded obedience, devotion, and a willingness to risk everything. From a distance, the blast furnace appeared almost serene, a silent monument of industrial ambition. But as you drew closer, the true power of the iron beast revealed itself. A low rumble shook the earth beneath your feet, like some subterranean creature stirring from its lair. Steam hissed from valves, carrying with it the acrid scent of coal and burning flux. The air vibrated with the relentless heartbeat of a machine that never rested. It did not tire, it did not falter, and it consumed endlessly. Each ladle of molten iron, each surge of heat from its glowing hearth was a testament to human ingenuity and human fragility. Men lined the yard, shovels in hand, bracing against the roar of the furnace as if they were taming a wild animal. Their lives were measured in shifts and embers, counted not in years, but in hours survived beside the heat, the fire, and the iron. Some had worked here for decades, learning to sense the furnace's moods, reading the subtle changes in pressure and temperature like a mystic reading the stars. Others were new recruits, their hands blistered within hours, their faces streaked with black, their lungs burning from smoke that clung to every pore. And yet all were drawn to the same magnetic force, this colossal furnace that promised wealth, work, and, for some, the chance to leave a mark on a nation being built in iron and fire. Even in winter, when rivers froze and snow drifted across the valley, the furnace never slept. Flames licked its inner walls at temperatures that would have melted ordinary steel. Sparks rained down like molten rain, hissing as they met ice and snow on the ground. The sound was deafening, a continuous roar, punctuated by the hiss of steam, the clang of iron chains, and the occasional boom of a pressure valve releasing pent-up force. You could feel the vibration through the soles of your boots, a reminder that the machine was not passive, it was alive, and it demanded respect. And yet, there was beauty in its brutality. The molten iron flowed like rivers of fire, carving paths through stone molds and channels. Shadows danced across the brick walls, flickering in time with the flames. Smoke spiraled into the sky, a dark, curling column that seemed to mark the presence of industry itself. To witness the blast furnace in operation was to see a world in which man and machine merged in a dangerous symphony of power, heat, and ambition. But behind the awe, there was terror. One misstep, one misjudged movement, and a man could be engulfed by molten iron or crushed by shifting machinery. This was a place where death and progress walked side by side. And yet, men continued to work, drawn by necessity, ambition, or the unshakable call of human curiosity, to see how far fire, iron, and ingenuity could take them. 2,000 tons of molten iron, enough to consume everything in its path, and in its shadow, men risked their lives to harness the power of the iron beast. This was the beginning of an era where machines would not merely serve humanity, they would define it. Then it arrived, Rising from the earth like a mechanical colossus, the blast furnace, an iron beast, towered over the landscape, a monument to human ambition and engineering audacity. 10 stories of brick and iron, lined with firebrick to withstand unimaginable heat, it stretched skyward, dwarfed only by the surrounding hills. Steam hissed from valves and pipes, punctuating the rhythmic pounding of bellows that forced air into its glowing belly. From a distance, it seemed almost alive, a mechanical titan awakening, its heartbeat measured in the roar of fire and the hum of machinery. This was no mere furnace, it was a predator, a force of nature bound by human ingenuity, capable of consuming ore and charcoal in quantities that would have crushed entire villages if left to human or animal hands alone. The first time the furnace fired, the valley shivered. Smoke curled upward, thick and acrid, carrying the scent of burning coal and limestone that stung the eyes and clung to every garment. Flames licked the hearth's walls, glowing bright orange and white, reflecting in the river that ran at its feet. Workers stood at a cautious distance, awed and terrified in equal measure. This machine did not simply burn fuel, it breathed it. It demanded constant attention, every valve, every lever, every draft meticulously monitored. The men who had once struggled to haul ore by hand now became its stewards, interpreters of its moods, mediators between human frailty and mechanical fury. The furnace had a presence that could not be ignored. When it worked at full capacity, it seemed to shake the earth itself. Sparks erupted from its vents like miniature stars, scattering across the yard, threatening the snow-covered wooden walkways and the stacked piles of coal. The roar was deafening, a low, continuous growl punctuated by the hiss of escaping steam and the occasional thump of molten iron striking the ladle or casting molds. Some operators whispered that the furnace had a temperament, that it could snap or lull depending on the care it received, and those who misjudged its moods paid with burned hands, lost limbs, or worse. It was a marvel of design and scale. Engineers had envisioned a furnace that could handle tons of ore, operating continuously through winter and summer while producing iron of consistent quality. The blast furnace was the embodiment of brute force harnessed with precision. Gravity pulled ore downward, bellows forced air upward, the chemical reactions within transformed raw rock into molten metal, flowing like rivers of fire toward molds that would shape bridges, rails, and weapons. Yet, despite its power, the furnace relied on men, working in shifts around the clock to feed it, regulate it, and ensure it did not destroy itself or them. The arrival of this steel giant changed the rhythm of the industrial landscape. Forests once felled for small charcoal furnaces could now feed a single machine for months, while entire rivers of ore once impossible to move were tamed into a controlled flow of molten iron. The iron beast became the centerpiece of the industrial village. Men lived and worked around it. Entire economies depended on it, and its fire illuminated nights otherwise dark and frozen. But it was also terrifying. The same flames that forged the iron could engulf a man in seconds. Steam blasts shot from relief valves, scalding anyone too close. Chains snapped under stress, ladles overturned, and men learned quickly that this mechanical titan, while magnificent, demanded respect in equal measure. It was a living machine, a force that could not be ignored, a creation both feared and revered. In its shadow, men and nature alike were dwarfed. Snow-laden trees bent under the weight of frost, rivers froze but flowed under the furnace's shadow, and even the strongest men felt small beside this roaring titan. The blast furnace was more than a solution to an impossible problem. It was the birth of a new era,
an era where human ambition could build monsters of brick and iron, and where those monsters would, in turn, define the limits of human endurance and ingenuity. This was the Iron Beast, the first of its kind in the valley, merciless, magnificent, and unstoppable. It did not simply exist, it ruled, and in its heat and fire, it would remake the world.
Inside the Iron Beast, a symphony of fire, steam, and gravity performed with relentless precision. To the untrained eye, it was chaos, a tangle of pipes, vents, chains, and glowing brick. But to the men who tended it, every hiss, thump, and roar was part of a rhythm, a story of power moving from raw ore to molten iron. The blast furnace was not just a machine, it was a living system, a mechanical titan with a heart of fire, lungs of steam, and a digestive tract that consumed mountains of raw materials to exhale molten metal. At the top of the furnace, ore, charcoal, and limestone were poured into the mouth of the beast. Each material served a purpose: iron ore to become the metal itself, charcoal to fuel the inferno, and limestone to bind impurities, creating slag that floated atop the molten iron like a shifting river of stone. Gravity pulled everything downward, deeper into the roaring chamber where temperatures soared beyond 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside, the heat was unimaginable, flames dancing across brick walls, molten rock glowing a deep red, and gases rising in turbulent spirals that hissed through vents with a sound like a dragon exhaling. Air was the lifeblood of the furnace, forced into the heart of the fire by massive steam-powered bellows. These bellows, operated by levers and chains, created a continuous torrent of oxygen that fanned the flames, making them hotter, more furious, more alive. Steam hissed through pipes, valves released pent-up pressure, and the metal within roared in response. It was a mechanical organism, each component feeding another. The bellows pushed air, the fire consumed the fuel, the heat melted the ore, and the molten iron flowed downward, pulled inexorably by gravity toward the collection point below. The molten iron collected in ladles, massive iron basins that were suspended from chains and guided along rails to molds where it would solidify into rails, beams, or cannonballs. Workers carefully monitored every movement, adjusting valves and airflow to maintain the delicate balance between chaos and control. One misjudged adjustment, one failed chain, one sudden surge in heat could send molten metal spilling across the yard, consuming everything in its path. The furnace demanded constant vigilance, a human eye to accompany every mechanical motion, a steady hand to navigate its fury. Even the byproducts were part of the story. Slag, the waste created as impurities were burned away, flowed out in thick, black rivers that hissed when meeting the cooler air. Steam clouds enveloped the yard, carrying the smell of charred limestone, smoke, and molten rock. Sparks flew from vents like tiny comets, scattering over the ground and snow, reminding all who worked nearby that this machine was alive, unpredictable, and deadly. The genius of the furnace lay not only in its scale, but in the harmony of its parts. Fire met metal, metal met gravity, and gravity met steam in a continuous cycle that transforms the landscape of industry. From the top of the furnace to the ladles below, the process was relentless, unceasing, and unstoppable. It required no pause, no rest, no mercy. The Iron Beast was both patient and insatiable, consuming fuel and ore with the precision of a predator, shaping the backbone of a nation with every surge of molten metal. To the men who worked around it, understanding the furnace was not about formulas or diagrams, it was about observation, instinct, and experience. They learned to read the machine, noticing the subtle change in color of the flames, the rhythm of the bellows, the hiss of steam as it vented. They became translators between human desire and mechanical might, steering the furnace through hours and days of production, knowing that their skill could mean the difference between molten metal flowing smoothly and disaster erupting.
In this way, the Iron Beast became both tool and master, a machine that embodied the fury and brilliance of early industrial America. Fire and steel, air and gravity, all intertwined in a continuous cycle that transformed the landscape of industry. From the top of the furnace to the ladles below, the process was relentless, unceasing, and unstoppable. It required no pause, no rest, no mercy. The Iron Beast was both patient and insatiable, consuming fuel and ore with the precision of a predator, shaping the backbone of a nation with every surge of molten metal. To the men who worked around it, understanding the furnace was not about formulas or diagrams. It was about observation, instinct, and experience. They learned to read the machine, noticing the subtle change in color of the flames, the rhythm of the bellows, the hiss of steam as it vented. They became translators between human desire and mechanical might, steering the furnace through hours and days of production, knowing that their skill could mean the difference between molten metal flowing smoothly and disaster erupting.
Life around the blast furnace was a relentless battle against fire, frost, and exhaustion. Men rose before dawn, often before the sun could pierce the smoke and fog that hung over the valley, and prepared for shifts that would stretch 12, 14, or even 16 hours. The air was thick with soot. The smell of coal and iron burned into every garment, every hair, every pore. Fingers blistered from lifting heavy tools, hands blackened from constant contact with metal and ash. Even the strongest men grew weary quickly, yet there was no respite. The furnace demanded constant attention, and the work of one man was always linked to the lives of others. Winter brought its own horrors. Snow drifted over the yard, coating walkways, ladders, and rails with slippery ice. The river froze, but the supply of water for the bellows and steam engines could not pause. Men huddled against bitter winds, their breath steaming as they hauled ore and charcoal to the furnace's mouth. Frost-bitten ears, frozen noses, and numb limbs were commonplace. Yet, despite the cold, the roar of the Iron Beast never faltered. Sparks fell like rain, landing in snowdrifts and hissing violently, a reminder of the constant danger that surrounded every worker. Inside the yard, a hierarchy emerged among the men. Some operators became legends in the logging and industrial camps, men who could read the furnace like a living creature, sensing subtle shifts in heat, pressure, and flame. They guided the less experienced, teaching them to adjust valves, move ladles, and anticipate surges of molten metal. Mistakes were costly. A single wrong step could mean burns, broken bones, or death. But knowledge of the machine gave these men power, a fragile mastery over something far larger and more dangerous than themselves. The daily rhythm was punctuated by small human dramas. One worker might collapse under exhaustion, only to be pulled from the edge of the molten iron pit by a comrade's steady hand. Another might risk a frozen climb to adjust a valve or chain, rewarded by a surge of molten metal flowing smoothly into molds below. Stories of courage and folly traveled quickly across the yard, becoming part of the camp folklore. Old Joe could feel the furnace's moods before anyone else, guiding iron down the ladles with uncanny precision. Little Sam lost a hand in his first week, and his misfortune was a chilling reminder of the stakes. Each life here was disposable in the eyes of fire and steel, yet each man was indispensable to the furnace's continued operation. Meals were simple and hurried. Workers ate quickly, often standing beside the furnace to keep warm. The smoke and ash clung to every morsel, but hunger made flavor irrelevant. Sleep was equally fragmented. Shanties near the furnace provided shelter from the elements, but thin walls and the constant roar of the machine made rest fitful.
Nights were often punctuated by the hiss of steam, the clang of chains, or the warning bell of a shifting ladle. Even in sleep, the iron beast demanded attention, a presence that could not be escaped. Despite the hardships, there was a sense of purpose. Every ladle of molten iron that flowed from the furnace was a tangible result of human labor and ingenuity. Bridges, railroads, and cities, symbols of progress, were built from the sweat and blood of these men. They were part of something larger than themselves, even if that meant paying with their comfort, health, and at times life. The furnace became both a master and a provider, a force that consumed endlessly, but also delivered the means to build a nation. Life around the blast furnace was a paradox. It was brutal and dangerous, yet awe-inspiring, punishing, yet indispensable. Men became part of a rhythm larger than any individual, a symphony of toil and fire, heat and steel. They lived on the edge of destruction, aware that the iron beast could claim them in an instant, yet driven by the knowledge that without their labor, progress would stall. Their lives were measured not in years, but in the glow of molten iron, the hiss of steam, and the roar of the furnace that both consumed and created.
The blast furnace was a marvel of industrial power, but it was also a predator. Every roar of flame, hiss of steam, and clang of iron was a reminder that the machine did not merely work, it demanded obedience. Men who labored in its shadow knew that one careless step, one misjudged action, could turn the furnace from a tool of creation into a merciless force of destruction. Danger was ever present, a constant companion woven into the rhythm of daily life. Boiler explosions were among the most feared occurrences. Deep within the iron beast, steam pressure built relentlessly, and if valves failed or operators miscalculated, the results were catastrophic. Steel and brick could explode outward, sending shrapnel into the yard, toppling scaffolding and hurling men into the flames. The ground would tremble, and the air would fill with the roar of metal tearing itself apart. Entire shifts could be decimated in seconds, leaving only smoke, screaming, and the twisted remnants of machinery to mark the chaos. Even seasoned men, accustomed to the furnace's fury, could not anticipate the exact moment when catastrophe would strike. Chains, pulleys, and ladles added another layer of peril. Heavy iron ladles, filled with molten metal glowing brighter than the sun, were suspended by thick chains over walkways. A snapped chain meant molten iron would crash to the ground, hissing and exploding upon contact with snow, ice, or stone. The sound was deafening, a thunderclap that rattled the bones and echoed across the valley. Men learned quickly that proximity to the furnace was always a gamble. A moment of distraction, a misstep on icy planks, and one could be engulfed in fire that consumed steel and flesh alike. Even the environment itself conspired against the workers. Winter transformed the furnace yard into a frozen gauntlet. Snow and ice coated every surface, making ladders treacherously slick, rails impossible to navigate, and shoveling coal a battle against numb fingers and frozen toes. Summer brought its own torment. Heat from the furnace could sear the air to unbearable levels, and steam clouds trapped inside the yard suffocated workers, leaving them gasping, dizzy, and vulnerable to burns or falls. Men carried injuries quietly, knowing that a moment's weakness could end not only their shift, but their lives. The accidents were not just mechanical. Human error magnified the danger. One man might miscalculate the angle of a ladle, another might fail to secure a chain, and suddenly the molten iron surged toward the edge of the yard. Workers shouted warnings, but even the fastest reactions could not prevent disaster. Tales spread quickly of men lost in fire or crushed beneath fallen machinery. Some operators survived because of quick reflexes, others because of sheer luck. These stories became part of the furnace's legend, whispered warnings to new recruits about the Iron Beast's capacity for vengeance. Yet it was not only the men who suffered. Forests near the furnace bore scars of industrial ambition, trees stripped and burned to feed the fires. Smoke darkened the skies for miles, stinging eyes and lungs. Rivers ran warmer and thicker with ash and slag, and wildlife fled or perished in the shadow of the Iron Titan. The furnace reshaped the world as much as it shaped metal, and its consequences were both immediate and lasting. Despite the omnipresent peril, men continued to work. Fear became a tool, sharpening instincts and teaching respect for the machine's power. Operators learned to anticipate the furnace's moods, the way the bellows thumped, the subtle shift in flame color, the pressure of steam against iron walls. They moved with a precision that bordered on instinct, understanding that survival depended on synchronizing with the beast, not confronting it. In the end, the dangers of the blast furnace were inseparable from its genius. It was a machine of creation and destruction, a force that demanded vigilance, skill, and courage. Every accident reminded men of their mortality, yet also of the power harnessed in their labor. The iron beast would continue to roar, claim, and forge, shaping both the landscape of industry and the lives of all who dared to work in its shadow. The furnace did not forgive, it did not pause, and it did not forget. The arrival of the blast furnace did more than transform a single valley. It reshaped an entire nation. Before its roar echoed across the riverbanks, iron production had been slow, fragile, and limited. The primitive bloomery forges and small charcoal furnaces that dotted the landscape could barely meet local demands, let alone fuel the ambitions of a young America. But the iron beast changed all of that. It was not merely a machine, it was a catalyst, a force that propelled industry forward with relentless power. It consumed mountains of ore, rivers of charcoal, and inexhaustible human labor, transforming raw materials into molten iron in quantities previously unimaginable. With this newfound scale, the blast furnace revolutionized infrastructure. Railroads, once a distant dream in many regions, could now be constructed with speed and precision. Rails forged from its molten metal stitched cities together, carrying goods, people, and ideas farther and faster than ever before. Bridges spanning rivers that had once been obstacles were now possible, their iron beams strong enough to bear weight unimaginable a decade earlier. And the very cities themselves, rising, sprawling, and ambitious, were built on the strength of iron supplied by the furnace's unyielding fires. Each ladle of molten metal was a building block for America's industrial empire, a tangible manifestation of human ingenuity harnessed to machine power. The furnace's influence extended beyond construction. Weapons and tools, essential for a nation expanding westward and defending its sovereignty, were produced more efficiently and in far greater quantities. Cannons, rails for military transport, and iron fittings for ships emerged from its fiery heart. The industrial knowledge gained from operating and maintaining the furnace spread quickly, informing the design of new machines and inspiring engineers to dream bigger. The furnace became both a laboratory and a teacher, demonstrating how fire, gravity, and steam could be combined into a single, unstoppable force. Economically, the blast furnace was transformative. Small, scattered operations could no longer compete with the scale and efficiency it achieved. Entire towns grew around the furnace, housing workers, their families, and the ancillary industries required to feed its insatiable appetite for ore and charcoal. Markets expanded as iron became more abundant, prices stabilized, and new industries, rail, bridge construction, shipbuilding, could flourish. The blast furnace not only produced iron, it produced opportunity, growth, and the infrastructure for a modern industrial economy. The environmental impact was also profound.
Forests were stripped to feed the furnace, rivers warmed and darkened by slag and ash, and wildlife retreated from the relentless activity. Yet these consequences were inseparable from progress. The blast furnace reshaped the landscape physically and symbolically, demonstrating that industry could bend nature to human will while exacting a heavy toll. In its smoke and fire lay both creation and destruction, an enduring testament to the cost of progress. Socially, the furnace redefined labor. Skilled operators became indispensable, commanding respect and sometimes fear. Work schedules, training, and hierarchies were established around the needs of the machine, creating a new culture where man and industrial giant were interdependent. Workers learned to anticipate the machine's moods, developing instincts and rituals to ensure safety and productivity. In a very real sense, the furnace shaped human behavior as much as it shaped iron. Ultimately, the blast furnace was a bridge between eras. It carried the United States from a patchwork of small forges and primitive furnaces into a modern industrial powerhouse. Its impact rippled through engineering, commerce, labor, and urbanization, leaving a legacy that endured long after the first flames cooled. Men who once struggled to move a single ton of ore now witnessed entire mountains consumed, molten rivers flowing into molds that would build the nation. The iron beast had done more than melt metal. It had forged progress itself.
The blast furnace did more than produce iron. It reshaped the world, both physically and morally, leaving men to confront the true cost of progress. Every roar of molten metal, every hiss of steam, and every spark that shot into the winter sky carried a lesson. Industry was not a neutral force. It demanded sacrifice, courage, and obedience. The men who labored in its shadow became part of something larger than themselves, yet they also paid a steep price: burned hands, frozen toes, crushed limbs, and in some cases, lives lost to the very machine they served. They were both masters and subjects of the iron beast, entangled in a relationship of awe, fear, and dependency. This tension, the coexistence of creation and destruction, is the essence of industrial history. The blast furnace did not ask permission, it consumed indiscriminately. Yet, in its fire lay the foundation of modern America. Bridges rose over rivers, railroads spanned valleys, cities expanded, and weapons were forged to protect a growing nation. These achievements were real, tangible, and enduring, but they came at the cost of human endurance and natural landscapes. The forests were stripped bare, rivers darkened, and the laboring men became ghosts in the machine's shadow, their stories often forgotten, their contributions measured only in molten tons of iron. There is a paradox inherent in such machines. They embody both the promise and the peril of human ambition. The blast furnace was a marvel of ingenuity, an instrument capable of shaping the world, yet it demanded constant vigilance and respect. It taught the men who worked with it a harsh, almost cruel lesson about the limits of human control. One misstep could undo months of labor in seconds. One misjudgment could end a life. Yet these same pressures forged skill, discipline, and resilience. Operators learned to read the machine, sensing subtle changes in pressure, flame, and rhythm, mastering a force that was far larger than themselves. In doing so, they became not merely workers, but interpreters of power, mediators between human ambition and mechanical might. The furnace also reminds us that progress is not free. Every achievement required struggle, risk, and endurance. The iron beast did not build cities by itself. It needed men willing to stand in its heat, to brave its fire and steam, to bend themselves to its rhythm. It did not simply shape iron, it shaped labor, community, and the culture of industrial America. Entire towns grew around its shadow, families lived and died alongside it, and generations were forged in the heat and smoke that rose from its mouth. In this sense, the blast furnace is a mirror. It reflects both the ingenuity and the cost of humanity's drive to create, expand, and conquer. Yet, there is a deeper lesson embedded in this story. Machines like the blast furnace are more than tools. They are testaments to human determination. They challenge us, push us, and demand that we adapt. They remind us that mastery over nature requires courage, knowledge, and respect for forces far beyond ordinary human comprehension. They are, in a way, living history, tangible evidence of ambition tempered by danger, creation forged alongside destruction. As the fires cooled and the molten iron flowed into molds, one thing became clear. The legacy of the blast furnace is not simply in the steel it produced, or the bridges it built, or the railways it enabled. Its true impact lies in the men who worked with it, the landscapes it reshaped, and the civilization it helped create. It symbolizes the eternal tension between human aspiration and human cost, between progress and sacrifice. In the end, the blast furnace did more than melt metal. It burned away illusions of comfort, challenged the strength of men, reshaped the natural world, and forged a path to modernity. It was relentless, unforgiving, and magnificent, a monument to the power of human ambition when wielded with fire, steel, and determination. And though the men who fed it are long gone, and the forests it consumed have grown anew, the lesson endures. Civilization is forged in the heat of struggle, and progress is earned, not given.